Welcome to Module 11 of AP Environmental Science. This module talks all about ocean currents and kind of that role that they play in regulating the temperature of the Earth. Now the ocean's really fascinating because it's able to take warm water from near the equator and move it out towards the poles to help thermoregulate the planet. So that way it's not super hot in the summer and super cold in the winter, or really hot during the day and really cold at night. Water has this great ability to absorb and slowly release heat. So for those of us living near large bodies of water, so people who live near the Great Lakes, the news forecast always says cooler near the lake in the summertime or warmer near the lake in the wintertime. And that's because the lake is able to regulate the temperature of that nearby landmass, which is pretty cool. The ocean does the same thing on a much larger scale. So the first thing we're going to look at are what are called ocean gyres. All right. So if you look at a map of kind of that surface part of the ocean, you're going to see that it doesn't all just kind of stay in one place. You'll notice that there's these great ocean currents that move clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. And what this does is it takes that nice warm water from near the equator and it pulls it out to the poles. And then it takes the cold water from near the polar regions and brings it back up towards the equator. And this helps keep everything nice and even. Now there still are some pretty big differences in heat between the water that's down by the poles and the water that's up near the equator, but that's helping to redistribute the heat. Something that you need to know about the ocean gyres is that they are clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. When you're looking at this image, you're also going to notice these upwelling zones. And those are these kind of blue patches on the western side of some of the continents. Upwelling is this pretty crazy phenomena. So this is something that happens when the surface water, that warm surface water, gets pulled away from a location. And typically that's because the wind is blowing away from the shore, or it's maybe blowing along the shore. So if we look at this area here on the northwestern part of South America, the winds are kind of pulling that water away from the continent, so a little bit northwest. As the winds pull in that direction, you can't get this hole in the ocean. It's all going to fill back in because water just takes up the space that it's given. So as this warm surface water gets pulled away, the deep, super cold, super duper nutrient rich water gets pulled up. Now all that nutrients is coming from poop, from all of, the fish poop, whales poop, dolphins poop, poop. That's all carries a lot of nutrients, and that's sitting in the bottom of the ocean. Also, the carcasses of dead animals are decaying down there. They're also really nutrient rich. So that water is carrying all that nutrients. It gets pulled in to fill this void. As that warm surface water gets pulled away, this kind of void gets filled with this really nutrient rich water. Now, if you have a garden, you know that usually your plants grow a little bit better if you put a bit of fertilizer on them. Same thing with the ocean. The phytoplankton, which is the base of the ocean food web, typically it's a lot healthier, they do a lot better when they have more nutrients and they have the right temperature and the right amount of sunlight. So in these areas that have a lot of upwelling, there's a lot of nutrients that are being brought up and they act like a fertilizer to the surface water. And when you have that fertilizer, it increases the biological productivity of the water and of that little ecosystem. Now, biological productivity means there's more things living there. So there's more fish, they're healthier, they're growing bigger. That means our fishermen, they're probably gonna go there. So throughout the world, most of our really good, really rich fishing grounds are located in areas that have a lot of upwelling. It's kind of neat. All right. The next way that the ocean kind of redistributes heat is called thermohaline circulation. Thermohaline, you can break it down into the Latin parts. I really should have got a degree in Latin, like I use it all the time. Thermo means temperature, haline means salt. Temperature, salt, circulation. So the salinity of the ocean, how much salt there is concentrated in the water, influences ocean circulation. So we have this shallow warm current, this yellow line. And that kind of flows along the equator a little bit here, and then it drops down and it warms up South Africa. Then it comes back up the western coast of Africa, back along the equator, picks up more heat, goes and warms up North America, comes back across, warms up Europe, and it gets up near the poles, and then it drops back down. So this blue is this deep cold water current. That's a current that's moving along the bottom of the ocean. So just like with upwelling, where we had that surface water getting pulled away, and that's pulling this deep, nutrient-rich cold water up near the surface, same concept. The water gets up here, gets kind of cold. Based on the temperature of the water, that increases the density, and the amount of salt in the water increases the density. When the water gets more dense, it sinks. So then it sinks down to the bottom of the ocean, and it crawls along this deep ocean current. Some of it will come back up into the Indian Ocean and circulate back, a shorter little loop. Some of it will come all the way around to the Pacific Ocean. So this is pretty cool. So the salinity of the water influences the ocean circulation. Now we've got the numbers 1 through 4, essentially saying that we start with our warm water. As it kind of moves, it evaporates out. So as that water evaporates, it gets a little bit saltier. As the water gets saltier and saltier, it becomes more dense. And when it becomes more dense, it sinks. And as that cold water moves along the ocean, it kind of recirculates again. And eventually it'll get pulled back up to the top. This is a pretty neat concept as well. Again, this is the reason why Europe is warm. If you look at the latitude of most European countries, they are much farther north than the majority of the United States, and yet they have a much milder climate than most of the United States. So it's kind of interesting. All right, one last concept. We have El Nino, also known as ENSO, which is El Nino Southern Oscillation. You need to know what El Nino is. So what is it? What causes it to happen? So what are those changes in the winds and the currents? And kind of how that influences our weather. So weather in the United States and around the world. I'm just going to talk about the United States because there's so many pieces to it, just to keep this video shorter. Now, there's also this thing called La Nina, which is the opposite of El Nino. So if you remember El Nino, La Nina is just the opposite. All right, so we have a normal year here where we've got, I'll move that sticker. We've got our trade winds blowing to the west, and this is all in the Pacific Ocean. And what they're doing is they're pulling that warm surface water over towards Asia. Now this is a process of upwelling. It's pulling that cold, deep water back up towards the surface. And this is kind of our normal pattern. Now, in an El Nino year, those trade winds weaken to the point that they're nearly reversed. So that warm surface water is not getting pulled across the Pacific anymore. It's starting to kind of hang out here just off the coast of South America. Now we have much less upwelling. Actually, we probably don't have any at all. That impacts the ecosystem within the ocean there, so we're not going to see as much productivity. But that also influences the weather patterns in North America. So when you have a weaker trade winds, the jet stream, which you guys hear about in the weather all the time, especially in the winter. The jet stream comes down and it brings that cold air with it usually. Well, that jet stream is going to shift further southward because we don't have these trade winds pushing, keeping it up. And when the jet stream shifts a little bit southward, it brings a lot of flooding to the southern United States, and it brings a lot of warm, dry air to the Pacific Northwest. Now, the Pacific Northwest of the United States is typically pretty damp. It's got those temperate rainforests, the only place in the world that those really are so strong and healthy. Typically, the southern part of the United States is pretty dry. So during an El Nino year, you're going to have kind of opposite of normal conditions. So Pacific Northwest is going to be very, very dry. Southern United States is going to have a lot of flooding. Now, in a La Nina year, once El Nino kind of gets its life figured out and starts going back normal, sometimes it'll just go way too far. Now we're going to have super duper strong trade winds. That's going to push all of this super surface water that's really warm all the way over to the west. We're going to have a huge pocket of cold water here near South America. Now, when you have these extra strong trade winds, you have an extra cold average ocean temperature. And that's just in this area. For the example I'm doing. This does happen around the world too. So when you have that extra cold ocean area, you're going to have increased upwelling in South America, which is great, more biological productivity. But we're going to see a lot of droughts in the southern United States. So it's exaggerating our weather patterns. We're going to have a lot of heavy rain and flooding in the Pacific Northwest of North America. So our weather patterns are really exaggerated. This can lead to a lot of issues. So this can impact farming and agriculture. This can impact human health. This can impact the availability of fresh water. So knowing what the El Nino phenomena really is and what drives it is really important. And that is the end of the module, right? That was a lot. We went pretty quick. But make sure to take good notes, make sure to bring your questions to class, and I will address them the best that I can.